I thought I traveled a lot, 100 countries over 15 years. But for the people you're about to meet, 100 countries is cute to them. That's because they're part of the most exclusive group of people on Earth. Only 300 people have been to all 195 countries in the world. For context, there are more people who have been to space. Join me as we learn how they did it, their favorite and least favorite countries, how they can afford to travel so much, and tips on how we can travel more. I'm Kevin Liu, the host of the Pick My Adventure show. Hey everyone, I want to welcome Harry Mitsidis from NomadMania today to the show. Harry is the founder of NomadMania, and he's also been to every country in the world, not once, but twice. He finished the first time in 2008, and he saw them all again, finished that in 2023. So Harry, thank you very much for being on the show.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So Harry, let me ask you first, what made you decide to go to every country?
I guess it's curiosity, the desire to see what's out there. Also, I think once you reach 100, which may happen just by accident, then it's almost like, well, I've done half, why not do the other half? And I think there's definitely a challenge element. I don't really think I believed it was possible or doable. And because I did it quite a while back when there was much less information and there was not that sense of community and people exchanging ideas and knowing each other. I really didn't think this is something that you can do, but there it is. It is doable, very much so, and I'm really glad I did it.
So when did you start this journey?
Well, look, I traveled quite a lot as a child and a young adult with my parents initially. They also liked to travel. In my 20s, I think, as a student, I did just some normal trips. I think I had about 60 countries, 60 something by the time I was around 27. So, not a very high number. But then around the year 2000, I don't know, I just got the travel bug. And initially, I wanted to complete the European countries, since that's the continent I'm from. And, Europe is small and compact, and that was definitely an achievable goal. But it was not enough. I mean, I finished them very quickly. So then I would say between 2001 and 2008 is when I really focused on doing it. And within those years, I managed to finish.
Wow. So what was that like when you finally got to that point in 2008? Well, you were saying that at some point you were like, this is feasible. I can actually make this happen. And when you finally got to that last country in 2008, it had been quite a journey. How old were you at the time? And what was that feeling like?
Well, I was 36. It was a little bit of an anticlimax. My last country was Equatorial Guinea. It had been really, really hard to get the visa, and then everything happened very quickly. Somehow, within 10 days, I found a contact who could do the visa, and it was all organized. And, it was like, blink, I've done it. I didn't even have time to process it. Because I didn't know any other travelers, I landed in Malibu, and there was no one to say anything to, no one to really celebrate with. I remember sending an email to some people I knew and my friends, and I'm like, guess what? I've done it. And I got some congratulations, some people saying you're crazy. We always knew you'd do crazy stuff. But I think that the biggest takeaway from me then was I was like, what now? I've done the countries. There has to be something more. It was almost like panic. Is this the end of the journey? And that's also why eventually I founded Nomad Mania. I wanted to give a challenge so big that it's almost impossible to be achieved and never ends, kind of.
Sure. So something that I get asked a lot, and I think a lot of travelers get asked, but also a lot of people are afraid to ask because they think it might be rude. But how were you able to afford traveling? How could you just be on the road for so long and be able to see so many countries at such a young age?
Yeah, well, look, back then, I was really on a budget. So first time around, I had a decent job teaching. I lived in Athens at the time. I taught at a college. I taught leadership management. We had really decent holidays, and I didn't have to pay any rent because I owned the property I lived in. I didn't have that many expenses. So literally everything I earned was spent on travel. And I think what happens when you understand how to travel is you really learn how to cut corners. Back in the day, I would really stay at cheap places. I eventually also used couch surfing, which was just beginning around that time. I learned the tricks in order to make it affordable. Sometimes it wasn't affordable, like with Bhutan, for example, or with North Korea. You've got to take tours, they're not that cheap, but it was not insanely expensive either. So I think it is doable. A lot of it is about combining countries so that you are maximizing in terms of price and time and benefit.
Okay. So what are some things that people listening, what can they do at home to help save money or cut those corners that you're talking about?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was never very much into gadgets, so I never tried to get the latest phone. I did have a car, but I still have the same car, which was bought in 2001. So, I mean, one of the tricks is just not to become engaged in things which are not your primary target. I certainly believe that in life, you need to make choices. um, if you really want to be a traveler, then that has to be your focus. If you want to be a traveler, but also be, other things and a lot of things, then you can never be a master of anything, which is fine. Not everyone wants to dedicate their lives to something, but I think that is it. You need to learn that there are sacrifices involved, uh, and you need to learn some tricks. I recently heard, for example, of they were an elderly couple and they didn't know how to travel, but they booked a trip to go to Ireland for 2 weeks for like $8,000 because they just gave it to an agent and the agent just didn't care. So I'm like, what? What you really thought that was a normal price? So I think doing your research, going online, comparing airfares, seeing what accommodation options there are, also looking at the country you're going to, understanding what the price ranges are and how they link to your budget, that's quite important. Many countries are really cheap compared to where we come from. And that's the good news. So I think most of the listeners of this program will be coming from, relatively wealthy countries on a global scale. So I think that is important. And another thing, of course, is to travel like a local. I think many of the big travelers often travel in a more organized way or through an agency in their home countries. That always gets the price up. But if you've got the spirit of adventure and just land in an unknown country and then let this adventure take you where it wants. And that's what I did the first time round. I traveled entirely alone, with the exception of Bhutan and North Korea, where I had to take tours. I never did. I never had an agent. I did everything on my own. So obviously, all that makes it much more affordable.
Sure. There's a lot of my friends will ask me, how are you able to afford to travel? And I tell them like little things that I cut out that they would never consider doing. For instance, I would never go to Starbucks and get a coffee every single day. I tell them these
Yeah.
little costs add up. I mean, if you
Yep.
spend $5 or $6 at the coffee shop 5 days a week, that's $30, it's $120, a month, and then times 12, you're looking at $1,400 right there. Like I recently, actually 10, 15 years ago, I cut the cable. Before it was popular to cut the cable, and now there's all these streaming apps. But back then, people are paying $100 per cable a month. And
Hmm.
that's another $1,000. And I tell people that's an international round trip ticket right there. I
Yeah, yeah.
little
I,
other things. I cut my own hair. I mean, probably that's why it's not so good. But I cut
well,
my own
luckily, that's an expense I
hair.
don't have.
Yeah,
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 yeah. And I've never had cable, so
yes, no, no,
it's true. Little things that end up. I don't have Spotify. I don't
yes.
have Netflix. So yeah,
Yeah, me neither. Well, I was
yeah.
borrowing people's passwords for the longest time, but one cost that I recently cut out that I had been avoiding for a long time was my gym costs, and that's sixty
Okay,
dollars a month, and I cut that. That's another $720 a year, and
okay.
so I cut that out because there's a lot of community gyms that are free.
Hmm.
I mean, the equipment's not as nice, but it's a YMCA or it's a local community run gym, and it's free. So, but little things I always tell people, if you can cut that out and you don't have credit card debt, pay off your credit card debt, you can travel. A lot of people are tied down by that. But
That's true. Yeah.
so what about now? Like on the second time around, you said the first time around you were traveling and you were doing it on pretty like a meager budget. What about now? How are you making money now?
Uh, well, real estate. And I think that is always the way to go if you can. If you can invest in a few properties and then they generate some income for you, which is steady, then
Hmm.
you've got it made. You don't need much more. And that is enough for me. I will never stay at an extremely expensive hotel. I have in recent years occasionally taken some really expensive trips, but I've compensated that by then not taking any others. So I have my annual budget. If I'm going to do something really expensive, then I know that I'm going to be spending my other trips in Albania, which is like super
Yeah,
cheap, and I'm not going to go very far.
yeah,
Yeah, I think real estate is a good solution. It gives me enough income to be able to keep myself on the road
mhm,
without doing things that are too excessive.
sure. Let's talk a little bit more about NomadMania. How did that come about? And it's a community of 31,000 people across the world. These are some of the most extreme travelers, a lot of members that have seen every country in the world. You, of course, being the founder and having done it twice. But how did that come about?
Well, as I said already, once I finished all the countries, I somehow needed something more, a bigger aim. And I think also I thought, have I really done the whole world? It seemed like there were too many places I hadn't visited to then be able to say I've been everywhere. So the idea was to find a method to divide the world in a different way, not in a country way, but in a more complex way, where you really need to explore countries deeply in order to say that you've really been there. So we divided countries into many regions, and currently on our master list, we've got 1,301 regions. So, I mean, that's quite an extensive list. The number is big enough to be challenging, but I don't think it's that big to be totally crazy. It is a lot, but if you think of the States, for example, people always sort of look at how many states have you been to. So this is a good starting point. Now we divide the states into more regions than the states. So for example, California is split into four. Texas is split into three. Some other states are split into two. So in that way, we urge travelers to go beyond the aim of just countries and to actually really understand the regional differences in countries. And I mean, in the States, there are huge such differences. But even in a country as small as Slovenia, I mean, Slovenia is really tiny, but the coastal area and the mountain area is totally different geographically, and even the people and the culture and even sort of the dialect they speak is quite different. So I think the idea of dividing countries is where it began. And gradually it has grown a lot into much more than I ever expected. Now we have a whole series of different lists. We recently introduced one of slow travel, which actually turns the tables around because people are always talking about numbers and, let me do it. As many people are thinking, let me do it as quickly as possible. And with our slow travel list, we're actually, changing the rules in a way and saying, wait a minute, we also need to look at how long you've stayed in the country, because slow travel, especially in terms of the debates with sustainable travel and all of that, it becomes more of a thing. And then that means you've actually got much more out of a place if you travel slowly. So NomadMania has a lot of that. And I think its real value is in the community of incredible travelers. I have met so many truly inspiring people from all over the globe thanks to NomadMania, and that is the biggest payback for me. Even on this trip, I'm now in the US, I'm traveling around, and even on this trip, I'm going to be staying with a number of people who are met thanks to NomadMania. So there's no bigger gift than that.
Sure. So you mentioned some meeting inspiring people. Who were some people off the top of your head that you might recall that are some of the most inspiring people that you've met?
Well, it's really difficult to name
Yeah.
drop
Right.
because if I do, then I'm definitely going to be forgetting someone. Well, I think one of the most inspiring people I've met is the one who we think finished every country first. And this is a Finnish gentleman who is called Rauli Virtanen, and he is a journalist, a war journalist. So his whole career has been spent covering conflict. He was in Vietnam in the early 70s as a young reporter there, and then he's been through Nicaragua, El Salvador in the 80s. He's been to Yugoslavia during those wars, and in general, he sort of chases the news and the war. So that man has seen so much, and sort of in between all that, he also managed to visit every country. So he is a real inspiration. I can't say how in awe I am of him. But there's many others. I mean, I think globally known is Tor Pedersen, who last year finished his voyage of going to every country without flying and without returning to his native Denmark. I mean, he is one of a kind. He really dedicated his life to this aim. That in itself is awesome. The tenacity and the ability to stick with it despite all the difficulties. That is inspiring. I know that I could never do that. So these are sort of two names who have inspired me, but there are really very many others.
Recently, NomadMania came out with a report, a comprehensive report on every person that has traveled to every country in the world. Up until that report, there was just speculation. People thought maybe around 250, maybe around 300. I've never seen a report, and I'm a former journalist, that was that comprehensive from NomadMania that came out and pretty much laid out that there's more than 350, I believe was the number, that have been to every country in the world.
Yeah, well, again, we gave a sort of variations to the number just to cover ourselves. So the ones that we believe we know of are about 350. Well, now there's a few more. So say 360. But then what we said is that we believe that there's about 30% that we don't know of. Like
Mhm.
we don't know they exist for whatever reason. So if that is true, then we're looking at sort of 470 now, around that number. And then of the 360, there's a few who we may not be entirely sure of. I mean, some people we have received rumors or someone has name dropped, but there's no other information about them. So it's difficult to know if they really have done it or not. So, we were able to say we can kind of confirm that it's about 300, but, those are the ones we can say with really, a 95-degree of certainty that they have really done it. So it is, in any case, whether it's closer to 300 or 500, it's not that many, is it?
No, not at all. But the report is so exhaustive and it's so comprehensive. How long did it take to do the report? How many people were involved? Because, and what are their backgrounds? Because I'd imagine you probably need somebody who's familiar with statistics, a lot of research, and just the writing and everything. It's just organization is incredible.
Well, okay. First of all, we on NomadMania, we already have our UN Masters list. So we already have a lot of this data because this list of UN Masters includes not only NomadMania members, but it's supposed to include everybody. So through this list, we already had the raw data there. It was just a matter of researching further in order to see if there's more people that are not on our list and then actually doing a bit of number crunching. I have a background in sociology, which means I know how to do research and I also know my statistics. So
Mhm.
I wrote this report, not on my own entirely, but I would say 90% of it was done by me, the writing, and then the infographics were done by some other members of the NomadMania team. It didn't take that long to compose the first draft, but then we kept on revising it, and there was a period last December, and that when I was very active in researching more people, and somehow the more I researched, the more people came up, and I would ask questions, and then it's just a matter of really finding this information, and I'm sure we've missed a bit. So if anyone's here and interested in the subject, please go to NomadMania and find the section on UN Masters. And if you know people who are not on the list, let us know, because we want this to really be the ultimate comprehensive tool to everybody who claims to have been to every country. And, the more people help, the more we can get this right. And people have helped. This is what makes it what it is, that people get, they send us emails and say, I know of this person, or, I did a cruise and there was this woman and she had done them all, and so through this kind of informal network, we have all this information.
Well, thank you for compiling that. And I know recently CNN quoted from it as well, and they used it in an article. So that's a huge accomplishment right there.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
great.
well, we were proud of that, I'll admit that.
Harry, can I ask you? You've lived a different type of life than what most people have lived. And are there certain things that you have bypassed that in society is expected from you that you just haven't done? I mean, have you gotten married? Have you had kids? Have you're pretty much not in one place at one time for very long. So are there some
Yeah.
things that you bypassed, and it doesn't make you sad that you bypassed them at all?
Totally, totally. Look, I was brought up in Greece, which is quite a conservative country in many ways, where, there is a way of doing things if you want to be a respected member of society. And that usually involves you becoming a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer, something like that. Um, I was a very good student, and I think people, or my family at least, expected a lot of what I would do, what career I would follow. And I do think that at one point, somewhere in my 20s, I just decided to reject all that and do something very different. I'm not sure initially it was a conscious choice, but I think the moment I founded NomadMania, it did become a conscious choice. So at that point, I was basically saying I no longer want to have a traditional job. I no longer want to have a traditional life where, I go to work, I come back, and this just continues forever. This is not me. So yeah, I have bypassed a lot of those expectations, and I can tell you that it wasn't easy. I mean, it's often difficult to retrain the people who love you to understand what you're doing, and understand your way of thinking, and then come to terms with it. And my parents, although they were very supportive, always of they were never outwardly negative, but my mother was always very worried about these trips. Obviously, some of them were to dangerous places. She would really get worried, and that also takes a toll. You don't want to be a source of worry for the people you love, but at the same time, you need to be true to yourself and do what what you want to do. Otherwise, I don't really believe in sacrificing for other people. That's not right. So yeah, in many ways, I have rejected the norms. I totally live to my own beat. But then again, I'm not alone. I mean, the community of NomadMania is not. I mean, there are many people who do have a normal job and they love NomadMania because of its features and its informative nature. And, they travel when they can. But there are some people on NomadMania who are even more extreme than me. They don't even have a home, for example, and they've sold everything and they live out of a suitcase and they just, do that for years. And I mean, that is really going a step further. I always do have a home to return to. I have
Mhm.
a permanent address, so to speak. And I think I would always want to. I'm not the kind of person who would want to roam without going back at some point. I do like that occasional stability of being at home. But anyway, to finalize this question, I think it's important for people to realize that everything you do in life and every choice you make does require giving up something else. You will never be able to have it all. So, yeah, I mean, my advice is make the choices that are true to yourself.
Sure. I can relate to you. I have a Chinese mother, of course, and a Chinese father, and they expect me as the only son to have a very 9 to 5 job. I mean, when I tell them I'm working remote, they don't think it's a real job.
Mm.
When I tell them I'm traveling, every time it's disappointment, and every time I dread telling them I'm going someplace, and I try to avoid it until I'm getting going to the airport, and then I'll text them because the next thing is if I don't text them I'm in another country, I'll hear an earful, and I'm way past the age that I should be getting an earful from my parents. But can I ask, but I do really want to get married and I really want to have kids. And I think part of me avoiding that for so long, not avoiding it, but it becomes harder and harder to find somebody who is going to uh, complement that side of my life, and
Again, from my experience, it's not impossible. I think it is a matter of luck more than anything else. There are definitely people out there who either understand the urge to travel or share it. There are a couple of power couples in our travel community who travel together. And I mean, they travel a lot. And that is nice to see, that they've come together and they are able to share this experience and they are couples. And last year, we also had the example of the first same sex couple who finished all the countries together. So they have a very successful online blog that focuses on food. But, along with that, they were trying food in every country. And so they are traveling together, but they're also, dating, they are together. So I don't think one should be discouraged. It's true that we have all these success stories. At the same time, many of the big travelers end up divorced. And in many cases, it's because their partner cannot handle all this roaming and traveling. But I think a lot has to do with open communication and being able to explain why you're doing it, and partially also compromise. I mean, if you're always going to be leaving, it won't work. If you can reach a compromise of, I'm going to be traveling half the time and then half the time I'll be at home, maybe this will be accepted. So, one should never um, believe that it isn't possible.
And do you hope to get married in the future or have kids
I
or?
am I am married. I am married. I am not really a father type. I don't
Yeah,
believe I want to have children. I
yeah,
know people. I don't know if I'm a horrible person for that. I am a godfather. I'm a 3 times godfather. So I've got two. They're now adults. 2 godchildren and one who's still very young. So I think I've been a good godfather. But I
yeah.
just I'm not the kind of person who will ever change diapers. It's not going to happen. So,
Sure.
yeah.
I would say I've only interviewed one person who had a kid, and that was Louis Siu, the social media star, 79-year-old. She has a daughter who actually doesn't really like to travel. She would take her when she was little, and she didn't really have the travel bug that Louisa does. And not many people do, of course, but
Yeah.
most everyone I've talked to hasn't had children. And so,
Yeah.
do you travel with your partner?
Occasionally, yeah,
See.
occasionally, but definitely not always. You know, it, it it depends on the situation. But let me also say that I know a lot of travelers who do have children, and I also know some families who travel together. So, no, you've got travelers of all shapes and sizes, and I believe. I don't think there's a rule, you know. I think ultimately every person and every couple need to reach an agreement of what suits them. So I don't think travel by itself is a reason to tear families apart or to remain single. I just think that it may be harder to find a conventional relationship of the type we're going to be together every evening and then wake up in the morning and we're each going to take our car and go to work. You know, that format will not work, maybe. But yeah.
Okay. The style of travel, your style of travel, what do you enjoy the most when you land into a country?
Well, my style has changed a lot over time. Right now, at this point, I think what I enjoy most is road trips. Uh, and this, I think, happened mainly since COVID. So before COVID, I would be very happy taking public transport and whatever. Occasionally, I may rent a car, but then with COVID, obviously, we had this issue of social isolation. You don't want to be near other people, and I kept on traveling during COVID, but I was quite cautious. I would say I was one of the more cautious travelers and people regarding this. So I would rent a car and obviously do things on my own by car. And I think that is when I really realized how much I like driving and how much I enjoy sort of the independence and the freedom of driving yourself around by car. And so that is my favorite way of traveling now, I think. I also think it's not the most expensive, it's also not the most economical, but probably it is the most empowering in a way. It allows you to do exactly what you want to do. You can't do that with public transport. And it again allows you to do things at a certain speed. You know, you're not too slow.
Sure. Can I ask your style of travel is you like these road trips, but what about when you interact with people? Like, are you the type of person who enjoys going to a bar, talking to people, walking around the streets? Are you uh, are you going to a nice restaurant? Are you eating street food?
Mm,
More along those lines. And I think you've done pretty much every style of travel by this point.
I
But
I have. I mean, it's really difficult to pigeonhole me. I am an introvert. I can never really see a situation where I would be alone and would walk into a bar in an unknown place. This is not going to happen. No. Uh, I will possibly go to a restaurant or a cafe. This is very probable. I may talk to people, but probably not first. I'm probably going to wait until someone talks to me in that sense. So I
mm,
think I am not the easiest person to really get to know um, people. But having said that, I speak very many languages and I'm very good at sort of chatting with taxi drivers and understanding what their take on the world is. And I also believe that taxi drivers are probably the best people for you to get the kind of pulse of a nation. So I am going to do that very happily if I have to. Um, but I think for me, at this point, travel is not that much about the people. Um, not about the people I'm going to meet, the random people I'm going to meet. It's more about seeing and experiencing the place and focusing on the atmosphere of the place, and then also about the people that I already know or with whom we may meet or experience this together. That is quite important.
Sure. As somebody who is a sociology teacher, a former sociology teacher, that was one of my favorite classes in university. And it's something that I really enjoy when I travel is I love to see how people interact. And I actually am the type of person who travels solo and I do go into the local dive bars, and I have drinks. I like to talk to the local people there, and it's a nice way to kind of get people going because they're with a few drinks they'll pretty much talk about anything.
Oh,
And I
true.
just love hearing what they have to say about how their government is. And of course, it's funny because I don't like to talk about top politics in the US, but I like to understand what they're going through in their country, and what
Yeah,
they think of their politicians there, because you take a lot of stuff for granted that we have here when you hear about somebody else's conditions someplace else.
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah. Well,
and I
I
do.
will
Yeah.
say it's always fantastic, especially in countries that are sort of out of the way, because that is where you're going to have these experiences more. In European countries, it's not going to be so easy to just talk to a random stranger. People are, they're more introverted. They won't necessarily do that. But then the minute you're in a country like Iraq or anywhere in Africa, you stand out and you're going to just naturally have people being curious about you and they want to know where you're from, and then based on your answer they have a response and some opinions. I often also find it interesting how they react to me, depending on whether I say I'm English or Greek. If I'm English, it's always David Beckham. It's like almost 100%.
Yeah.
If I'm Greek, they sometimes don't know what that is, but if they do, it's always Alexander the Great or the Olympic Games, and I'm like, well, that was a while back, but anyhow.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's interesting to see what people associate with our countries of origin, and then of course, based on their behavior, ultimately you also shape your opinion of a country. At the end of the day, when you're leaving a country, I think if it's a plus or a minus, it depends mostly on the people, not so much on what you saw.
Hmm.
Don't you think that?
Yeah, no, it really is. I just enjoy hearing. That is my favorite thing, is to actually just talk about people, or just talk with people and understand more about their background and their lives. You were talking about David Beckham, and I couldn't help but think to myself that when somebody is calling out to me trying to sell me some trinket on the street, it's used to be Bruce Lee. Now it's like, hey, Jackie Chan, and that's what
Yeah,
someone from an Asian background has to deal with. It's like
yeah,
that's who they remember. That's who they've seen on TV in the movies. Even though
yeah.
I'm from the U.S., there's not much they can say, right? It's either Trump or or Obama, and they know all the movie stars come from there. But for me, like, to try to get my attention, it's always been Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, right? That's the thing. And you learn not to be offended. I mean, in the U.S., you
Yeah,
get offended by everything. You hear, someone looks at you wrong, you're offended. But if someplace else, you
yeah,
realize that's just the only Asian person they know. So
yeah. That's
they're trying
true
to
as
get
well.
your
Yeah, yeah.
attention.
I
Yeah.
think another thing that for me never gets old, and this happens mainly in Africa and in some Asian countries, are these kind of groups of children that somehow congregate around you because they're fascinated by the difference. And then, if you engage with them, more and more children come, and then it's like this group. And I remember I was in Sierra Leone last year, and then all these children ended up coming out of their school and singing and dancing, and I it was one of the times that I had actually thought about this in advance, and I had a lot of pens with me, so I was giving out pens to all these kids, and they were just ecstatic. They were going on there. They were singing. They were dancing. It was so nice to see this, and this never gets old somehow. No matter how many times I've experienced it in how many countries, it's always such pure, warm. good energy, and I just, it's where you think if everyone was a child, we would not have wars. This world would be a better place, but unfortunately it isn't. So
That's so true that you mentioned that. I mean, we come from very diverse countries. So when school children don't congregate to somebody normally on the street that they see, but when you're visiting a country in the Middle East or someplace in Africa or even Central America or just remote regions, if you don't look like the other people there, they are so wide-eyed and they're so
mm,
optimistic. They want to shake your hand. They want to give you five, and they want you to take their picture. And you're right. You just that optimism, that look in their eyes. It's such a great feeling to try
yeah.
to just smile back and provide some happiness as well for them for a few minutes at least. What are your going to the Sierra Leone story? What are some of your favorite memories besides that from your travels?
um One of my funniest memories happened to me in Bangladesh. Um, and I was going to a World Heritage Site, which is a mosque, quite it's about an hour, I think, from Hulna. It's called Bagarhat. So I had just got off the local bus and I was walking to the mosque. And again, it was like a couple of teenagers there. And in Bangladesh, they speak decent English. So they approached me and they were so curious. It's probably not one of the more visited World Heritage sites. So there I was, and they're like, "Where are you from?" And I told them, and and then the question was, "Are you Muslim?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't really believe in God." And the answer was, "So you're a communist?" And I just thought that has stuck with me because it was said so spontaneously, and in that boy's head, you've got the believers, and then if you're not a believer, you're necessarily a communist because the communists don't believe in religion. I cracked up. That was hilarious, but that was just one small episode. um what are some other memorable moments I've had? Geez, sometimes it's difficult to put them together because there's so many.
Mhm.
Let me think about that one. One experience I had was in Iran, where I had this driver who, took me around a few places. And then he insisted on taking me home to meet his whole family. Uh, and that was just mind-boggling. Not only the reception there, the mother, the father. I mean, you would think I was the long lost son whom they've just seen. The enthusiasm of them, and then somehow food appeared from everywhere, and then the sisters came, and everyone was so casual and genuinely friendly, as if we had known each other forever. And I didn't really have a common language with these people because the driver spoke English and one of the sisters spoke a little bit of English, but that was it. But it was just this, I still remember the mother's face and her eyes, and she was looking at me as if I represented, I don't know, to her, I obviously represented something. I don't know if it was the world out there or whatever, but she was kind of in all she wanted to do was please me and feed me. That
Mhm.
was a very memorable experience. And of course, I mean, if we talk about Iran in general, it is a much maligned country. And I'm not going to talk about the political aspect because that is not of interest. But when you meet individual people in Iran, again and again, they surprise you with their friendliness, their hospitality, and how curious they are about you, but in a genuine way. And also, one of the questions is, what do you think of Iran? So they are very proud, and they obviously it's difficult to answer that question entirely honestly, because you don't want to hurt them. And I mean, I do love Iran. It's got so much culture. The food is
Mhm.
good, and I mean, it's the people I always just tell them, the people are so great. How can you not love Iran? So that's a memorable experience. Another memorable one on the border of Turkmenistan and Iran. I was crossing the border from Turkmenistan, and a woman seemed very intent on me marrying her daughter, and she she kept on taking out pictures of this daughter who was not there from her bag and showing them to me, and sort of looking at me for signs of approval and interest, and saying she's a very good girl, she's a very good cook, again and again. And this lady was probably, I think many people were going to Iran to either buy or sell goods, and this is something that they would do kind of as their job or continuously. So she was wearing these very local outfits with, I remember, a green sort of a green headband and a very nice, colorful, flowery outfit. So it was just one of those memorable, hilarious episodes I've had. So these are just some of them. There are many more. Obviously, anything to do with North Korea is going to be always interesting, and it's the country that people usually ask me about, because most people don't realize it's possible to go there. Not for Americans, I know, but when I went, it was possible, and we had quite a few Americans in the group, in fact. But yeah, I mean, there everything is uh, out of this world. And I think for me, one of the most interesting things is when we landed, and this was back in 2004. Immediately, the first thing we did was go and buy a bunch of flowers, which we would then lay at the statue of the great leader. But what was interesting is that when we got to this place where we would buy the flowers, it was a tiny little booth, and they had one bunch of flowers, which we bought. And then you're thinking, okay, is this staged? Is this, where are the other bunches of flowers for the local people or anybody else? So this was just the beginning of a whole series of bizarre events where not only me, but the others felt everything was staged and that we were living in a kind of parallel universe there.
I've heard that about North Korea, where it's staged, it's manufactured, the shops are just put up for the tourists, for the guided tours. Do you have any chance to see anything outside of what they want you to see?
Um, you do actually, but you need to be quite observant. I mean, I don't think, first of all, I'm not sure that we as visitors are really as important as we think. I mean, let's be honest here. Uh, I do remember that the second time I went, we were taken to this resort, which is near the border with South Korea, which is on the mountain Kumgan, I think it's called, National Park. This is actually a pretty place, and it's also, because it's a national park and it's about nature, it was probably the only time in the trip where we forgot about the political angle. We just enjoyed a hike up the mountain. But I remember being transported there from the local airport where we landed. I mean, that was a 2-hour drive, and they cannot control what you see from the window of the bus. And I think I remember passing a small town which was truly dire. I mean, I think it looked like the 1930s in some rural Eastern European place. So we were able to witness some of that. But again, you would have to be observant, and it was nothing that you would see because they wanted you to. It would be just by the way. Um,
Mhm.
there were many changes the second time, and I do think that by then there was some level of development. I don't know what things are like now, obviously.
Mhm. Yeah, I would love to go visit North Korea, but I'm afraid because a prisoner is a negotiating chip. for North Korea and the U.S. these days. And I'm sure it's doesn't happen frequently, but it still happens occasionally. And I know that I think a lot of these um, imprisoned Americans were stealing a poster or taking a picture of something
Yeah.
that they shouldn't have. So
Yeah, I
it's
know. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't want to comment on the politics. I mean,
yeah,
the country itself is just, it's
yeah,
totally, it's an outlier. There's no country like it. I mean, people often say that Turkmenistan is like,
heard that.
but
You-
it's not. I mean, Turkmenistan is, it does have its quirkiness, but I would say it's still within some sort of a norm. North Korea is just out there beyond. Uh, it's still shut due to COVID, so it's still
Mm,
not visitable as we speak
mm,
now. And I know many people who are waiting for it to open because they want to reach 193. So,
yeah.
they have to be very patient and hope for the best.
I would love to visit it just to see how the people live. Like that village that you said was from the 1930s. I would love to be in that village and spend a few days. I also would love to spend. Have you heard about the American Amish?
Yes, of course, in Pennsylvania. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would
Well,
love to
more.
spend. I'd love to spend a week there and just see how they live there. It's just these
Yeah,
are the experiences that I love. Is just seeing how people live.
yeah. That's
Can I ask you
totally
what's up?
true.
Can I ask you about the question that you probably get the most, that most travelers that have been to every country get, which is, what are your favorite countries and why?
Look, this is a question I really don't like answering. I feel like all countries are my children almost. I hope that doesn't seem presumptuous. Even the ones I don't like, I often feel it might have been my mood that day. And then there's all these things that can happen that affect your opinion. One bad encounter, one rude waiter, for example, and you might be, I don't like this country, which is unfair, obviously. Uh, I will take it by continent. In the Americas, one of my favorites is Nicaragua. I find it very charming, uh, very old fashioned. It's like going back in time, much more so than the other Central American countries. It's very colonial. It's sort of slow paced, and the locals are genuinely nice. So, and it has some awesome natural sights, the lake, the volcano. I mean, it is set apart, I think. So it gets my vote of confidence. In Africa, it would be Namibia. Namibia is an amazing country. It's got everything. It's got beaches, it's got desert, it's got wild animals, it's got colonial architecture, plus it's safe. Which is more than can be said about other African countries. It also has some of the nice little lodges that you can stay in, really, really well maintained, great food. It's just overall a joyful experience. So I can really recommend Namibia. In Europe, I always go with sort of underdogs in Europe, countries that are not as visited as they should be. I'm going to mention Romania here. Again, I think people often just associate it with Dracula, and that's it. Romania equals Dracula, but Romania has so much more to offer. Again, a country with incredible mountains, and some of the villages are like going back 100 years. They still have horses and whatever. You can't believe you're in Europe, but it's charming. Again, lots of good food. There is a dessert called papanash. Remember the name. If you go to Romania, try to order papanash. It's like a sort of donut made of curd cheese inside with jam on top. It's a calorie bomb, but oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm,
in Asia, it's hard to say. I was recently in Japan for a month, and yeah, I mean, Japan is unparalleled. It is just amazing. Um, I don't even know where to start with Japan, but I think what makes Japan so amazing are the people. They are consistently friendly, uh, interesting. They are quirky because of such a different culture that, you know, it's sort of, they come off as very different. But some of the kindness, I remember going to a museum in the middle of nowhere, and the men there who were workers, because this was some sort of engineering museum, they were so happy that we were there. You know, they were giving brochures out, and even though the man spoke really, really bad English, he tried so hard. You know, it became his task of the day to give this information in English. I just thought that was so sweet, you know, and consistently we had this kind of experience in Japan of kind people. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Japan there. And if you haven't visited, that's a place to go to.
Hmm. And do we get South America? Was Nicaragua for North and South America, or was that for
Uh
just?
well, okay, I can give you. Well, in South America is a bit more difficult for me to find. I mean, I'm gonna go with Colombia because again, Colombia is one of those countries that has a bit of everything. You've got beaches, you've got sort of cities in the jungle, you've got colonial places, you've got urban, grungy places with sort of in Medellin, there's this kind of seedy undercurrent, but now it's kind of safe enough and you can go. It's Colombia has. I hope they don't go back to being dangerous again, because I heard that in the last couple of years things haven't been that great. But before COVID, it was really on the way up, and hopefully it will still be one of travelers' favorite countries.
All great countries you mentioned. I haven't been to Namibia yet, but definitely I'll put that on my list. Can I ask about your? And I don't know if. Well, first, thanks for your patience with answering your most disliked question. It's almost every traveler's most frequently asked, but most disliked question. So I understand because I get that as well. What are some of your worst experiences? Have you had real experiences that stand out in your mind? A situation that, like, wow, this was horrible.
Well, I did end up in jail in Yemen, and that was pretty horrible. Uh, not one of the best moments. It makes a good story afterwards. You know, when you remember it, you laugh. But you know, I had these men come by car to the hotel and detain me, and put me into this car which was battered. And, you know, they're sporting guns, and it was night. So, I mean, just imagine the setting of there's a car with four men, you know, brandishing guns. It's night, and they tell you get into the car. I mean, do you run? What do you do? But anyway, they genuinely were the police, so they were not, you know, terrorists or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that was a memorable night for all the wrong reasons, and it only lasted a night. So I guess I'm fortunate in that way. And quote unquote, it was for my safety. But well, I could have done without that.
What was their jail like?
Oh, well, cockroach infested, rags. I shared the cell with a man who apparently someone then told me had beaten up his wife. And I mean, he, it was just, the whole thing was over the top. Then at one point, I think they took some mercy on me and took me out to a sort of open air courtyard. So at least I could see the stars, but then the mosquitoes became the problem. So yeah, in the morning I was like, and I was wearing a kind of loose fitting Omani uh, sort of robe. So I didn't actually, yeah, my ankles were not really covered, and yeah, the mosquitoes had a bit of a feast. Yeah, it was bad. You know, I think the worst thing in that situation is not the actual present of what you're experiencing as much as the insecurity of what's going to happen next, because you never really know what are their intentions. You know, will I be okay in the morning? Will they let me go, or will this escalate and will I be here forever? And I think that insecurity is what what drives you crazy, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that mentality though, where you do look at it at something as an experience. And whenever I've had something bad, I'm always just look at it from the other side. I'm like, you know what? I haven't been through this experience before. It's something that pushed me outside of my comfort zone. And I
Yeah.
like to be pushed outside of my comfort zone these days to try because it takes so much these days and it's hard. But so what's next for you? I mean, you're still traveling right now. Right now, you're in the US. You say you love road trips, but what else is out there for you to explore and accomplish?
Oh, well, at this point, I no longer look at it as an accomplishment. I look at it more as enjoyment and exploration and just learning and seeing new things. And luckily, the world is endless. I mean, you can never really say you've been everywhere and done everything. Uh, I I do really believe I'm going to be traveling forever, and there are many countries out there that I want to visit for a third or fourth or fifth time. Um, I think I am going to focus a bit more on countries that may be considered by the community as more tourist friendly or quote unquote easier to visit. But that's not because I want to have an easier time, but it's because I ignored these countries while trying to do all of them. I think, like I said, I've been to Japan, and I spent a whole month there, and I realized how little I knew Japan based on my previous times. So I think I am going to become a bit of a slow traveler and try to get into countries deeper, spend more time there, and understand them more fully. And this will just continue.
Harry, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. I have appreciated everything that you've told me, especially with what you're doing with Nomad Mania, and I can't wait to see the future of it. And is there any place else that we can find you? Do you have any like social media presences that we can check out to see where you're at and what you're doing?
I do have an Instagram. It's Harry Nomad. That's basically my only real social media. I do have a Facebook account under my name, but I don't use it much. And even my Instagram, you're gonna have to, ask for to follow me. It's not open. So I told you I'm a bit of an introvert, and I like to keep it that way. So
Well, I thank you for
yeah,
divulging so much then today. So after this, you
yeah.
probably need a few hours of just detox, and not talking to anybody. But
No,
Harry,
no, I'll be fine. Thanks.
all right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Remember, you can find more information about today's interview subject at pickmyadventure.com and discover more interviews. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on Pick My Adventure. I'm your host, Kevin Liu. You can find out more about me on Instagram at Pick My Adventure Traveler, where I let you pick my destinations and travel activities through polls.